There are moments in a man's life that divide everything cleanly into before and after. Not the dramatic moments you anticipate, not the ones you brace for, but the quiet ones. The ones that arrive without announcement, without music, without any of the signals that something is about to change permanently. For me, that moment was a back door. A back door standing open on a Tuesday afternoon in October, with the autumn light coming through it at an angle that made it look almost peaceful, and a silence behind it that was not peaceful at all. I have been hunting and fishing in the woods of western Pennsylvania for 53 years. I know what silence sounds like when it is right, and I know what it sounds like when something is wrong. The silence in my house on that Tuesday afternoon was the second kind. I knew it before I crossed the threshold. I knew it the way you know the things that your body understands before your mind has finished forming the question. My name is Robert Eugene Calloway. I am 67 years old. I was born in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, the son of a coal miner and a schoolteacher, and I have lived in the same county for my entire life, except for 4 years in the Army and 2 years working pipeline construction in West Texas in my late 20s before something in me that was specifically Pennsylvanian pulled me back north. I spent 34 years as a union electrician and the last 12 of those as a foreman on commercial projects across western Pennsylvania and northern West Virginia. I retired at 62 on terms I was satisfied with. My hands show the work. I do not apologize for that. I have a wife. Her name is Dorothy. Dorothy N. Calloway, née Marsh. She is 64 years old, and she has been the organizing fact of my adult life for 41 years, which is the length of our marriage, a number that still surprises me occasionally in the way that large and important numbers do when you stop and look at them directly. Dorothy is 5 feet 4 inches tall with gray hair she wears pulled back and the specific quality of patience that a woman develops when she has spent 41 years married to a man who goes quiet when something is bothering him instead of saying what the thing is. She has more of that patience than anyone I have ever known. She has needed it. I have a daughter. Her name is Christine. She is 38 years old, and she lives 12 minutes from our house in a neighborhood I know well because I drove those streets for years watching her grow up. Christine is, in most of the ways that count, a woman I am proud of. She became a registered nurse at 24 and has worked in the same hospital in Uniontown for the 14 years since, with the kind of dedication that tells you a person has found the thing they were meant to do. She is good at her work. She is organized and capable, and when she loves someone, she loves them with the complete and demonstrative warmth of her mother, which is the best thing she inherited from either of us. She is also the reason I was in the woods for 3 days in October and not at home. Christine planned the fishing trip. That is the fact I have had to sit with most carefully in the months since. The fact that requires the most deliberate and patient accounting before it can be held in a way that does not consume everything around it. She called me in late September and told me that she had arranged 3 days at a cabin on Yoyogheny Lake with 2 of my oldest friends, men I had fished with for 30 years, and that she had coordinated it all, the cabin reservation, the equipment, the timing, and that she wanted me to go and have the kind of weekend that retired men who spend too much time worrying about their wives deserve to have. She said it warmly and with the specific affection of a daughter who loves her father. I received it as exactly that. Dorothy had seemed fine when I left. That is the word I keep returning to. Fine. She had made me coffee that morning and stood at the kitchen door and waved when I pulled out of the driveway. She had her cardigan on, the green one she wears around the house in autumn, and she was smiling. I have replayed that image many times. The green cardigan and the coffee and the wave. Fine. I want to tell you about her husband before I tell you what I found in my basement. Because the husband is the center of this story, and the center of this story is not a simple man, and understanding him requires more than a sentence. His name is Derek Paulson. He is 41 years old. He met Christine when she was 29 at the hospital where she works, where he was employed at the time as a medical equipment sales representative, a job that suited him in the way that sales work suits certain kinds of people, people who are good at reading what other people need to hear and providing exactly that, regardless of whether it is true. He is 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, and has the practiced ease of someone who has spent years perfecting the presentation of himself as a person worth trusting. He proposed to Christine after 14 months, and I watched Christine's face when she told me, and I said the right things because she was happy and I loved her, and because I did not yet have the language for the unease I felt, and did not trust an unease I could not articulate. They married in the spring of 2015. I walked Christine down the aisle and handed her to a man whose handshake lasted 1 beat too long and whose toast at the reception was about himself, in the specific way of a toast that appears to be about the bride, but is actually a performance of the groom's feelings about himself. I noticed these things. I stored them in the place I store things I notice, but cannot yet do anything with. I have a large place like that. 41 years of marriage to Dorothy filled it with things that turned out to matter and things that turned out not to. I did not yet know which category Derek belonged to. Over the 8 years of their marriage, I had revised my opinion of Derek downward in increments, never in a single dramatic moment, always in the accumulation of small observations that individually meant nothing and collectively meant something I had still not named by the Tuesday in October when I came home from that lake. He borrowed money in 2018 and repaid it 3 months late without mentioning the lateness. He made comments at family dinners that were positioned as jokes and landed as something else, the kind of comments that everyone hears and nobody addresses because addressing them would require naming what they are, and no one wants to be the person who names it. He managed Christine in the specific, quiet way of a man who understands that managing someone is most effective when the person being managed does not recognize it as management. I watched Christine's world narrow over 8 years, not dramatically, incrementally, the way a room gets smaller when you move the furniture a few inches at a time. Dorothy saw it too. Dorothy saw it before I named it and saw it more clearly. She told me in the 7th year of their marriage, on a Sunday evening after Derek and Christine had driven home, that she was worried about Christine in a way she could not fully explain. She said, "Robert, something is not right in that house." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I mean Christine is not herself, and she has not been herself for a while, and I think that has something to do with Derek." I said, "What do you want to do about it?" She said, "I want to be careful." I said, "I know." She said, "But I also want to be watching." She was watching. She had been watching. And Derek knew she was watching. That is the piece I did not understand until after. That Derek's awareness of Dorothy's awareness of him was not passive. It was not the mild discomfort of a man who knows his mother-in-law does not fully approve of him. It was something more active and more calculated than that. Dorothy told me things in those last weeks before the fishing trip, things that Derek had said to her in private moments, comments that had the structure of jokes and the intent of warnings. Things like, "Dorothy, You really should focus on enjoying your retirement instead of worrying about things that aren't your business. Things like, Christine and I have our own way of doing things, and it works better when people give us space to do it. He said these things pleasantly. He said them with the face of a man who is offering friendly advice. Dorothy told me about them, and I listened, and I felt the unease in its familiar place, and I still did not fully do what I should have done with it. I should have named it. I should have named it out loud, to Christine, directly and without decoration, while there was still time to name it in a room where Derek was not present to manage the response. I did not. That is my accounting, and I am not going to dress it up. I left for the lake on a Saturday morning at 6:15. Dorothy was at the kitchen door with the coffee and the green cardigan and the wave. I drove north. 3 days later, on Tuesday afternoon, I pulled back into my driveway at 4:47. I know the time because I looked at the clock on the truck's dashboard when I turned off the engine, which I do habitually at the end of a drive, the way some people check their mirrors, automatically and without particular reason. The driveway was empty. Dorothy's car was in its spot. The front of the house looked as it always looked. I got out and started unloading the truck, and something stopped me. The back door. I could see it from where I was standing at the rear of the truck. The back door of the house, which leads into the kitchen from the side yard, was standing open, not ajar, open, wide enough that I could see the edge of the kitchen table from 20 feet away. Dorothy does not leave doors open. In 41 years, I have never come home to an open door. It is the kind of specific and absolute consistency that you absorb about a person over decades without ever recording it consciously, and it surfaces only when it is violated. I left the gear in the truck and walked to the back door. The kitchen was empty. The lights were off. There was a coffee mug on the counter with the coffee still in it, cold, and with the specific gray surface of coffee that has been sitting untouched for a long time. Next to the mug was Dorothy's reading glasses, folded, the way she folds them when she sets them down to do something else and intends to come back. She had not come back. I said her name. The house said nothing back. I went through every room on the ground floor. I went upstairs. I checked every room with the building speed of a man whose body has decided what is happening before his mind has caught up, and whose legs are moving on the instructions of something deeper than thought. Empty, all of it. I came back downstairs, and I stood in the kitchen, and I looked at the coffee and the glasses and the open door, and my heart was doing something I have never felt it do before and hope never to feel again. Then I saw the basement door. It was closed. The basement door is always open in our house, propped with the old brick doorstop Dorothy has used for 30 years, because the basement is where I keep my workshop, and I go down there often enough that a closed door means something is wrong with the ventilation or the cat has gotten in. The cat has been gone for 6 years. The brick doorstop was on the floor beside the door, not in front of it. The door was closed. I opened it. I am going to tell you what I saw at the bottom of those stairs plainly, because the plain version is the one that is true, and because decorating it would be a disservice to the woman who endured it. Dorothy was on the basement floor, on her side, between the water heater and my workbench. She was conscious, barely. Her lips were cracked in the way that lips crack when a person has had no water for an extended period. Her face was pale in the specific way of someone whose body is conserving everything it has left for the most essential functions. She had her cardigan on, the green one. She had been wearing it since Saturday morning. I was down those stairs in 4 steps. I do not remember the stairs. I was on the floor beside her and my hands were on her face, and I was saying her name over and over in the specific urgent repetition of a man who needs a response more than he has ever needed anything. She opened her eyes. She looked at me. And the look on her face, when she understood that I was there, was the specific look of a person who has stopped believing that rescue was coming and then seen it arrive. It is a look I will carry for the rest of my life. I called 911 immediately. I gave the address and described her condition, and they told me not to move her, which I had already understood, and said an ambulance was 12 minutes away. I stayed on the floor beside her, and I held her hand, and I talked to her in the low, steady voice I use when I need to keep something calm, a voice I had not known I possessed until that moment. And she held my hand back with a grip that told me she was still in there fully, that the body was depleted, but the person was completely present. Subscribe right now and hit that like button, because what Dorothy whispered to me in that basement before the ambulance arrived is the moment this entire story has been constructed around, and I need you present for every word of what comes next. Drop a comment and tell me where you are and what time it is there, because what she said changed the temperature of every room I have walked into since. She pulled my hand closer. I leaned down. She said in a voice that was reduced to almost nothing by 3 days without water, but that was still unmistakably Dorothy. She said, "Robert." I said, "I am here." I said, "Do not try to talk too much." She said, "I need to tell you." I said, "You can tell me later." She shook her head. A small movement but definite. She said it was Derek. I stayed very still. She said, "He came Saturday afternoon. After you left." She said, "He told me Christine was not coming. He said Christine had an extra shift at the hospital and would not be by until Sunday." She said he came in through the back, and he was very calm and very pleasant, and he asked if he could wait in the kitchen for Christine to call. She said she made him tea. She said they talked for a while, and then he asked if he could look at something in the basement, something I had apparently mentioned needing attention, and she said she could not remember mentioning it, but she went with him to show him whatever it was. She said she was at the bottom of the stairs when she heard the door close above her. She said she heard the lock turn. She had been on that floor since Saturday afternoon. She had no phone, no water, no way to contact anyone. The basement has one small window at ground level, but it faces the side yard and opens onto the fence. She had tried to call through it on the first day. No one had come. I stayed on that floor beside her, and I held her hand, and I listened to her tell me this in the specific, careful way of a woman who has had 3 days to think about what she needed to say and has organized it in exactly the right order, and I felt something happen inside me that I do not have a single clean word for. It was not rage, though rage was in it. It was not grief, though grief was in it too. It was something more total than either of those things. It was the specific feeling of a man who has been handed the complete picture at last and finds that the complete picture is both worse than he imagined and exactly what his instincts had been trying to tell him for 8 years. I said to Dorothy, very quietly, so quietly that it was almost not a sound at all, I said, "I understand." She squeezed my hand. She said, "I know you do." The ambulance came in 11 minutes. They were good, efficient, and calm, and they had her on a stretcher and moving within 5 minutes of arrival. Dehydration, they told me, serious but not irreversible. She needed fluids and monitoring and rest. I rode with her to the hospital, and I sat beside her bed while the IV went in and watched the color come back to her face in gradual stages, like dawn coming up in increments, and I talked to her about ordinary things, the fish I had caught and the weather at the lake, and the argument Bernard had made at dinner about a football team that did not deserve defending. And she listened and sometimes smiled, and once she fell asleep mid-sentence, and I sat there in the hospital chair and looked at the fluorescent light on the ceiling, and I thought about Derek Paulson. I thought about his handshake, the one that lasted a beat too long. I thought about the toast at the wedding, and the borrowed money, and the comments at dinner, and the way Christine's world had narrowed. I thought about Dorothy at the kitchen door on Sunday evenings, saying something is not right in that house. I thought about the 8 years of small observations that I had stored carefully and never fully acted on. I did not call Christine that evening. I want to be clear about that because the decision not to call Christine that evening was the most deliberate decision I made in the entire sequence of what followed, and it was the one that cost me the most personally. I did not call her because I did not know, in those first hours, exactly what Derek had told her, or what version of events she had been given, or what her position was in what had happened to her mother. I did not want to call her and give Derek 30 seconds of warning. Whatever those 30 seconds could cost me in terms of Christine's feelings about being informed, they were not worth the risk of Derek having them. I made that decision alone at 11 o'clock at night in a hospital chair, and I do not regret it. I called 2 people that night. The first was my attorney, a man named Gerald Hurst, who has handled my legal affairs for 22 years, and who answered his personal cell on the 3rd ring with the composure of a man who receives late calls from clients and understands that those calls are not made frivolously. I told him what had happened in the order it had happened. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Robert, do not go near Derek Paulson tonight." I said, "I know." He said, "I mean it." I said, "Gerald, I am 67 years old, and I have been married to that woman for 41 years, and I am sitting in a hospital chair watching an IV drip into her arm. I know what tonight is for." He said, "Call me at 7 in the morning." I said, "I will call you at 6:30. He said, "I will be ready." The second call was to a man named Arthur Webb, who had been my closest friend since we were 19 years old, and who lived 4 miles from my house, and who I knew would be awake, because Arthur has not slept past 5 in the morning since 1987, and considers anyone who does to be making a lifestyle choice he does not respect. I told Arthur everything. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have valued about Arthur for 48 years. When I finished, he said, "Where is he now?" I said, "I do not know, and I am not going to find out tonight." He said, "What do you need?" I said, "I need you to be ready Thursday morning." He said, "I will be ready." That was the whole conversation. 48 years of friendship distilled into 4 exchanges. It was enough. Now I need to stop here, because what Gerald Hurst and Arthur Webb and I set in motion on Thursday morning, and what Christine learned in a room without Derek present for the first time in 8 years, and what the police report said when Dorothy gave her statement, is the part of this story that the first half was building the foundation for. Hit that like button right now and subscribe if you have not already. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are and what time it is there. Because what happened to Derek Paulson over the 90 days that followed is going to require you to be settled, because it builds and it does not stop building until the last piece is in place. Thursday morning. I had spent Wednesday at the hospital, leaving only once to go home and shower and come back. Dorothy was improving with the specific steady pace of a woman whose body is resilient and whose will is stronger than her body. By Wednesday evening, she was sitting up and eating and telling the nursing staff things about their own workplace that they had not expected a patient to know, which told me she was herself again. The doctor said she could go home Thursday if she continued improving. She continued improving. Gerald Hurst met me at the hospital at 6:45 Thursday morning. He had spent Wednesday with a colleague who specialized in criminal law, a woman named Patricia Osai Mensah, who had been practicing in Pittsburgh for 18 years, and who Gerald described, accurately as I later learned, as someone who understood exactly how to build a case that would not have a single loose thread for a defense attorney to find and pull. Patricia had reviewed what I had told Gerald. She had questions. She came with Gerald, and she sat in the family consultation room down the hall from Dorothy's room, and she asked those questions with the specific focused efficiency of someone who knows that the first 72 hours of a case like this are the hours that determine what the next year looks like. I answered everything she asked. I gave her the chronology, the 8 years of observations, the specific incidents, the borrowed money and the narrow world, and the comments at dinner. I gave her the names of 3 people who had been present at family gatherings over the years, who I believed would be willing to corroborate specific moments. I gave her Dorothy's account, as Dorothy had given it to me on the basement floor, and I told her that Dorothy was 40 feet down the hallway and would give it again herself, in her own words, as soon as she was ready. Patricia wrote everything down in a precise and rapid hand. When I finished, she looked up and said, "Mr. Calloway, has your daughter been told?" I said, "Not yet." She said, "We need to do that carefully." I said, "I know." She said, "Would you like help with how to do it?" I said, "Yes." Christine came to the hospital at 10 on Thursday morning. I had called her at 8 and told her that her mother had been taken to the hospital, that she was stable and recovering, and that I needed her to come alone. She asked if Derek should come. I said, "Christine, I need you to come alone." The specific weight I put on the word alone must have landed because she said, "Okay, Dad, I will be there at 10. She walked into that family consultation room and she looked at me and at Gerald and at Patricia, and she understood before anyone said a word that this was not a conversation about her mother's health. She sat down. She looked at me. She said, "Dad, what happened?" I told her. Not everything, not all at once, but the shape of it, the Saturday afternoon and the basement and the 3 days and what Dorothy had whispered to me on the floor. I watched my daughter's face receive this information the way a structure receives a load it was not designed for, in the specific visible stress of something trying to hold what it was not built to hold. She did not cry immediately. She went very still in the way of a person whose body has chosen stillness as the response to something too large for immediate movement. Then she said, "Derek," not as a question, as a confirmation of something she was checking against something she already carried. I said, "Yes." She put her hands flat on the table, the specific gesture of a person trying to hold something steady. She said, "I knew something was wrong." She did not say it with accusation. She said it with the exhausted recognition of a woman who has been telling herself for a long time that the thing she was feeling was not what it was. She said, "He told me Mom called and said she was going to her sister's for a few days. He told me it was last minute and that she said not to worry about calling because she needed space." She said, "I thought it was strange. Mom always calls me." She said, "He said she was fine." She said it with the specific flatness of a woman who has just understood what fine has been meaning in her house for a long time. I reached across the table and I put my hand over hers. I said, "Christine." She looked at me. I said, "Your mother is 40 feet down that hall and she is going to be all right, and everything that happens from this moment forward is going to be handled correctly." She said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means Derek is going to answer for this in every way that the law provides, and in some ways that take longer and go further than the law but are equally real." She said, "He is going to say it was an accident." I said, "I know he is." Patricia said quietly from across the table, "Ms. Paulson, can you tell me what your husband's access to your mother's house was like?" Christine looked at her. She said, "He had a key. He had had one for 3 years." Patricia made a note. She said, "Was that arrangement his suggestion or your mother's?" Christine was quiet for a moment. She said, "Now that you ask it that way, it was his." Dorothy gave her formal statement to the police that afternoon in her hospital room, with Gerald present, and with the composure of a woman who has had 3 days of thinking to organize what she needed to say, and says it clearly and without embellishment. The officer who took the statement, a detective named Karen Sowell, who had been with the county sheriff's department for 16 years, told Gerald afterward that it was one of the most coherent and detailed witness statements she had taken in a case of this kind. She said Dorothy had dates, times, the specific sequence of events, the exact words Derek had used when he turned the lock. Dorothy had been lying on that floor for 3 days with nothing to do but remember. She had remembered everything. Derek Paulson was arrested on Friday morning at the house he shared with Christine, who had not gone home on Thursday night. The charge was unlawful restraint and reckless endangerment, the correct starting point for what would become a more significant set of charges as the investigation developed. He came to the door in the unhurried way of a man who has already constructed his version of events and is confident in it. The officers told Gerald he had been calm and cooperative at arrest, in the specific way of someone who believes that is a strategy. It is a strategy. It simply does not work when the documentation is what Patricia had spent 2 days assembling. Christine filed for divorce on the following Monday. She came to my house Sunday evening and sat at the kitchen table, where Dorothy was now home and recovering, wrapped in the green cardigan and drinking the tea she had been denied for 3 days. And Christine sat across from her mother and held both of her hands, and neither of them said very much for a long time. I stayed in the kitchen, and I made dinner, and I let the silence between them be what it needed to be, which was the specific restorative silence of a mother and daughter who have both understood something they cannot yet fully speak, and who do not need to speak it to know that the other one understands. Christine said, "I am sorry, Mom." Dorothy said, "You have nothing to be sorry for." Christine said, "I should have listened more carefully." Dorothy said, "You listened exactly as much as he allowed you to." She said it without heat, as a plain fact. Christine looked at her mother for a long moment. She said, "How did you stay calm down there?" Dorothy was quiet for a moment. She said, "I thought about your father coming home." She said, "I thought about the back door being open and him seeing it, and I thought, Robert will see that and he will know." She said, "I just had to wait for Robert. I heard that from across the kitchen. I did not turn around. I stood at the stove, and I let it land, and I thought about 41 years and green cardigans and coffee in the morning, and a wave from a kitchen door, and what it means to be the person someone waits for. It is the largest thing anyone has ever said about me, and it was said in the most ordinary possible way, and it is the thing I will carry longest from all of this." Derek Paulson entered a plea agreement 11 months after his arrest. The charges, which had expanded during the investigation to include a prior incident of financial manipulation against Dorothy that Patricia had uncovered through subpoenaed bank records, resulted in a sentence of 4 years in a state correctional facility and a permanent restraining order that covered Dorothy, Christine, and myself. His attorney argued for lesser consequences. The judge, a woman who had been on the bench in our county for 23 years, and who Patricia told me had a specific and well-documented lack of patience for men who harm elderly women, was not persuaded. I was in that courtroom. I sat on the right side, the correct side, and I watched Derek Paulson stand before a judge and receive what his choices had assembled for him, and I thought about a back door standing open in October light, and a coffee mug with cold coffee, and a pair of reading glasses folded on a counter. I thought about the basement stairs and the 4 steps I don't remember taking. I thought about her hand finding mine in the dark. He looked at me once, across that courtroom, before they took him out. I held the look until he looked away. It did not take long. Christine is rebuilding. It is not a quick or simple process, and I do not expect it to be. She is still at the hospital, still doing the work she was meant to do, and she is doing it with the specific focused energy of a woman who has been given back the full use of herself after years of having it managed. She comes for dinner on Sundays, not every Sunday, but most. She and Dorothy sit at the kitchen table and talk about things I am not always part of and do not need to be part of, and the sound of the 2 of them in that kitchen on a Sunday evening is the sound of something that was damaged being carefully and steadily repaired. Dorothy is fully recovered in the physical sense. She has her garden and her reading and her opinions about the neighbors' landscaping choices and the specific warm authority she has exercised over this household for 41 years. She is herself, completely and without remainder. There are moments, I will not pretend otherwise, when I see her look at the basement door and something crosses her face that is not fear exactly, but the echo of an experience that her body has not entirely finished processing. Those moments are less frequent than they were. I believe they will continue to become less frequent. I am patient with them in the way that a man is patient when he understands that what someone went through was real, and that reality takes the time it takes. I changed the locks the week after she came home, every lock in the house. I installed a security system that alerts my phone if any door or window opens. I put a code lock on the basement door so it cannot be engaged by anyone without that code. Dorothy knows it. I know it. No one else does. That felt like the right architecture for a house that had been violated in the specific way ours was. You build to hold what needs to be held. You account for the load. You do not leave the load-bearing elements exposed to something you have already identified as a threat. I am 67 years old. I have spent my life working with the systems that hold things together when they are under pressure. I have spent 41 years doing the same work inside a marriage, which is its own kind of structural engineering, and which requires, like all good engineering, that you pay attention to the small things before they become large ones. I did not pay enough attention to the small things with Derek Paulson. I noticed them. I stored them. I did not act on them when acting on them might have changed the sequence. That is my accounting. I own it without excuse. What I also know, and what I hold alongside that accounting, is that Dorothy waited for me, that she lay on that floor for 3 days and she thought about a back door, and she thought about a man who had been coming home to her for 41 years, and she believed, with whatever she had left, that he would see the door and he would come. I saw the door. I came. If this story landed somewhere real in you, hit that like button right now and subscribe. We are here every week with stories that carry the full weight of real people in real moments that do not resolve neatly because real things never do. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are and what time it is there. We read every single one. And from everything I mean when I say thank you for staying with this one to the end. We will see you in the next story.